Hey, how's it going, guys? Jackson here with Toasty DIY, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Harbor Freight Standing Sandblaster. So this is the Harbor Freight blasting cabinet, and of course, just like pretty much any other pneumatic sandblasting cabinet, they all come in about, the same size and shape, really, unless you get like an industrial one or a tabletop one. A standard standing one is usually around like 40, 30, 50 pound. This one's a 40 pound. Harbor Freight just sells two to my knowledge. They sell a tabletop one that I think is like a 25 or 30 pound capacity, and then they sell the standing one. I decided to go with the standing one just because it was only a little bit more expensive and you get a lot more capacity with it, as well as some other features. Like, it comes with a light, which I honestly have not even used, just because I used it like one time and it was just really dim, and based on all the reviews I saw, everyone was saying that they kind of just suck. So I was like, well, I'm not going to mess with that. I just put my Makita battery powered light on top of the glass, while I'm blasting pretty much. But yeah, long story short, building process is it's tricky. I mean, it takes a while. I don't think the instructions are terrible, but I don't think this is something that like the average person who normally doesn't put stuff together like this would be able to catch on very quickly. I mean, it took me a while, and I built a lot of stupid stuff like this, as you can tell. But yeah, long story short, I mean, for the price, this thing is pretty amazing. Like, I really was expecting for it to kind of be sucky, but it's honestly good in almost every way for the price. So one of the very first things I did before I even used the unit, because I saw a lot of reviews, normally you use this pickup tube right here, which basically allows the unit to pull sand or your media straight from the bottom. So it's not gravity fed, rather it's a siphon system. I ended up doing this. I literally just went to Lowe's, bought a brass adapter, and then basically another adapter on the opposite side to screw it in, and now I have it to where it just sucks straight from the bottom. You do have to buy this tubing, which is kind of expensive, like 15, 16 bucks. I think it's like 5/8, and it can handle like 200 psi. Realistically though, this is just the siphoning part, so it really doesn't need to be able to withstand a lot of psi. The more flexible, the better. This stuff's not very flexible. It's very brittle, so I will say that part kind of sucks. It's basically just vinyl reinforced hose, but other than that, this thing's pretty much stock. And one of the things that I really should have done better in checking with the reviews is sealed this thing up. Well, they include a whole tube of silicone, and I'm like, man, that's a lot, but realistically it's not. I mean, they want you to use pretty much the whole thing, because the stand, it just leaks out from everywhere. I mean, you can see on top of the glass, I already have that. And I've only really used this thing one time. Now, I did use it for a really big piece, which I want to show you guys because it turned out really good. So this is an intake manifold for my 280Z, and I bought it off of eBay, so it was used, and it wasn't super dirty, but it was dirty enough to where I wanted to try this thing out on it. And yeah, the end result's pretty crazy. It basically makes it to where it looks like, I mean, raw cast aluminum again. Now, of course, it does get rid of like the shine, which is weird because I was reading a lot of people saying that like glass media, which is what I'm using glass, would help shine aluminum. But in my case, I don't know if maybe I needed to do it more, but it felt like the more I did it, the more clean the aluminum got, but the duller it got. I mean, I don't know if you can tell, but it's very dull. The parts that are shiny are because I took a brass brush afterwards to try to get some of the shine back, which does work pretty well, by the way. There's also like a lot of at-home DIY stuff you can do to get the shine back. But yeah, long story short, came out amazing. I mean, look, this isn't even aluminum. This is actually it's like mild steel basically, and you can see some parts like I missed, like there, like this was covered in rust, and I just for fun kind of blasted that, and I mean, it's super smooth. It's almost a weird feeling, but yeah, it came out really good. So of course this wouldn't be a good video if we didn't test the sandblaster. So I think this could be kind of fun. This is a heat shield. This is just mild steel to my knowledge. It could be stainless, but I don't think it is, just because of how much rust we have on it. It is 40 years old though, so who knows? But yeah, you know what? We'll do this a little bit. And then I do have a couple pieces of aluminum we can do as well. Now, one of the things I want to address in this video that there's not a lot of research on, which I hate, is that I didn't know if you get a sandblaster, do you have to have a vacuum? I noticed that everybody that has one pretty much runs a vacuum. So I'm like, okay, I guess that means you have to have one. So I was like, you know what? I have like 4 extra shot backs. Well, not extra, but I have like 4 shot backs. So I was like, I'm going to try running this without a vacuum first and just see what happens. So I was using this for probably, I would say like 30 minutes straight, and this is about the result you get. I mean, it is hard to see. Now, obviously, if I didn't have sand leaking on the outside, it would be a little bit cleaner, because you can tell a lot of this mess is on the outside. But on the inside, you do have some pretty bad spots where you can see, like, you know, you really can't see much through there right now. So a vacuum obviously would help. You have a vacuum hook up here. There's also like a port in the back as well. It's a lot bigger that I guess in theory you could use. I just have some air filter in that right now, just so that we're not blasting sand straight out the side. But another thing a vacuum will help with as well is dust. I mean, you can see, I'm almost positive this is all from the sandblaster. I mean, the car was a little bit dusty, but I mean, if you look over here, we have like no dust, and then you look over here, and we have all kinds of dust, which it's very close to the sandblaster. So, you know, obviously the thing's, you know, leaking in some spots a little bit, which we need to address. So, long story short, let's just go ahead and turn on the air compressor. We're gonna do no vacuum again, and we'll just see if you guys are able to see what's going on. Now, one more thing I just thought about, I should probably show you guys, is the air compressor I'm running. So, this is a 26-gallon Cobalt Quiet air compressor. It's 150 PSI max, 1.8 horsepower. Now, one thing that this really lacks in is it's 4.5 SCFM, or around the same CFM. I think it'd be slightly less CFM technically, and 90 PSI. Now, this sandblast cabinet actually calls for more. I mean, it calls for like, I think it was like 8 or 9 CFM, which is a pretty significant difference. So I was almost worried that my compressor wouldn't work, but after reading a lot of reviews, people were running even smaller ones than mine. So I was like, okay, you know what, it'll probably be fine. And so far, it has honestly been perfectly fine. So we're gonna go ahead, make sure this is locked, which this latch, I don't know why it just does not work for me. I don't know if I mounted it wrong or something, but it doesn't really close all the way. So yeah, I'm not gonna force it. I mean, honestly, it's very sandwiched right now. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and set the camera up in a spot that can hopefully see us. I'm probably gonna have to kind of hold this with one hand actually, so that's what we'll do. I am putting a mask on because I, you know, like I said, I'm not running a vacuum, and vapors are vapors. When you get this full of pressure, stuff escapes. So we just want to play it safe, make sure we're not breathing any of this stuff in. And all right, so look at that, we're already getting some sand out of here. All right, you guys ready? Here we go. All right, it might be a little hard to hear me right now with the air compressor, but yeah, I haven't tried steel yet. It has a lot of rust, and it doesn't look like it did like a great job in the rust portion. I think if we held it on longer, it probably would. Look at all that dust we got going on here. I'm gonna go ahead and pull this out real quick before we get dust everywhere. All right, let's see what we got. Oh yeah, it actually did do a pretty good job. I mean, you can see, you know, we got, I guess you could say like pitting. Yeah, we have pitting from the rust, really close on. Really can't do anything about that. But I mean, as far as removing everything, it really did. I mean, it removed everything in the area I was spraying, which I just sprayed in the area that looks lighter and I guess you could say darker. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty impressive. I really didn't exactly know how something like this would come out, but yeah, looks like it did a pretty good job. Now I do have something that I think will be really fun. We have this old water pump here that I just took off my Z, which actually is still working pump, and it's OEM, so you know, could be worth something one day. But that's aluminum, and then the top is either mild steel or stainless, you know, some of the carbon steel. So that'll be pretty fun to sandblast some of this. I'm not gonna do all of it because, as you can see, already getting a little bit cloudy in here, and I don't really feel like adding a ton more dust in this room while I don't need to. I do think I'm eventually going to add a vacuum. I really need to seal this stuff as well. If we run a vacuum, sealing, in my opinion, is not super important. The main thing that's happening is you got to remember, we have all of this air, I mean 100 psi rushing out with sand going everywhere, filling it with dust. It's going to try to escape out of every tiny crevice it can find. So that's why running a vacuum, so you kind of equal out the pressure, you know, you have something sucking while you have something blowing, you know, will remedy that issue for the most part. So yeah, we'll probably eventually do a vacuum, but for now, like I said, this works. If you're not doing any like major amount of sandblasting and you're okay with a little bit of a mess and everything, especially like if you're doing this outside or like, I don't know, like in a carport type area, you might be perfectly fine, you know, never running a vacuum really, but it all depends on how much blasting you plan on doing. If you're doing a lot, a vacuum's pretty much necessary. Otherwise, you're not going to have very long sessions without having to go through and clean and stuff. All right, hopefully you guys can see this okay. Let's go ahead and do some blasting. So we're just gonna go ahead and do a little section here. I'm gonna do it the best I can. It's a little bit hard to see and hold the camera at the same time, but I'm gonna do some of the steel as well, whatever type of steel that is up top. Do some of the screw hole. All right, let's go and get that piece out. Oh yeah, that looks really good. I think anyone can appreciate that before and after. So here's like a before. It's kind of covered in sand right now, so it's a little bit, it looks washed out, but you can see like how dark it was. And then here's after. You can imagine if you go through and like polish that when you're done. So that's aluminum. Now you have here a screw as well, or a stud, which that's, you know, some type of like carbon steel. And then this, like I said, is likely, I don't know, it really could be stainless, but I'm really not sure. I don't know if like holding up a magnet to it and trying to figure that stuff out, but some type of steel for sure. And as you can see, I mean, it's, yeah, it completely takes off all the rust scale and everything. So yeah, I mean, it's pretty impressive what this cabinet can do. It does take a lot of patience. I mean, that manifold, like I said, took me probably 30 minutes. Now, if I had a vacuum running and I was able just to go straight through and not have to stop, I probably would have been fine. But another thing is I do have to stop due to the size of my air compressor. It definitely, like if you had like a 50 gallon, 60 gallon, and it was like, you know, let's say 2.5, or like a 2-stage air compressor, you're not going to need to stop once probably. I mean, you're going to be fine just running all the way through. However, with mine, if I just try to run it all the way through, it does use enough air that the compressor will just constantly cycle. I mean, the engine, or not the engine, the motor will just constantly run, and that's just not good for a smaller compressor like that. You don't want to be using it and having it just run constantly, because it will, you know, it'll prematurely wear out the rings and everything. So, you know, it's one of those things where you want to let it fill up every so often at least and give it a break. So what I was doing was I was just basically, my garage is a mess again, but I was taking the time to go through and clean up. So, you know, I'd wait for the compressor to turn off. I'd come, you know, blast the intake manifold that I was working on for about, I don't know, you know, a few minutes, like 3 minutes or something before the compressor kicked on again. And then once the compressor kicked on, I'd go back to cleaning. And, you know, eventually I was able to finish off with this result here, which I was very happy with. You know, I think it looks really good. So that's pretty much it though for today's video. You know, if you're thinking about buying one of these, let us know in the comment section down below. But yeah, we hope you guys enjoyed, and we'll see you all in the next one.